In 1932, during Leonard Woolley's excavations at workers clearing a flooded temple archive recovered a basalt tablet, copied centuries earlier from older damaged originals. Catalogued and shelved quietly, it drew little attention until 2019, when a digitisation project at the British Museum rephotographed the surface under raking light. The new images revealed 9 numbered entries, each describing a sealed gate beneath ancient waters, gates linked to Eridu, to Dilmun, to drowned temples and guarded routes. 8 entries followed an identical formula, 1 did not. The 9th gate, the tablet said, had already been opened. It did not say which. The team that received the tablet for translation was led by Iraqi epigraphist Layla Mansour, attached to the State Board of Antiquities Cuneiform Unit since 2014. Mansour had spent most of her career on administrative texts, ration lists, temple inventories, land transfers, material that rarely surprises anyone. This tablet did not behave like an inventory. The script ran in 9 discrete blocks, each separated by a horizontal ruling line, each block opening with the same 2-sign cluster, K-Ab, mouth of water. Mansour recognized the pattern immediately. Sumerian scribes used numbered, ruled lists for census records, ration tallies, and legal codes. Structured material meant to be checked, copied, and verified against an original. Whatever this was, someone had wanted it counted correctly. The tablet itself was a copy, not an original. A colophon at the base of the reverse identified the scribe as working in service of a temple at Nippur, and dated the copying to a period scholars place several centuries after the flood event the Sumerian King List uses to divide all of recorded history into 2 eras. Before the flood, when the King List records rains lasting tens of thousands of years, and after it, when rain lengths drop abruptly to ordinary human spans. The scribe was not inventing the 9-gate list. He was preserving something older, something that had already survived 1 transmission before it reached his hand, and he said so. The colophon notes the text was copied from a damaged original, words restored where the clay permitted. Mansour cross-referenced the colophon against the older flood narrative every Sumerian scribe at Nippur would have known by heart, the one describing windstorms and floodwaters sweeping over the land together, the great storm flattening the country as one, before the waters held the surface for 7 days and 7 nights, and the sun finally returned. That story ends with survival, with a hero, with the world resuming its ordinary shape. It does not mention 9 gates. It does not mention anything staying sealed once the waters receded. If this tablet was connected to that flood at all, it was describing something the older, more famous account had left out, or had been instructed not to include. That detail mattered to Mansour more than anything else on the tablet. A scribe correcting damaged cuneiform typically marked his restorations, flagging guesswork so later readers would know which words were certain and which were inferred. This scribe did the opposite. He marked nothing as uncertain anywhere in the text. Every line reads as if it had been fully legible in the original, which meant either the original was in far better condition than the colophon implied, or the scribe was copying from memory, from oral recitation, from something other than the damaged clay he claimed to be restoring. Mansour set that contradiction aside and kept reading. The 9 blocks describe 9 gates, K-Ab, the same opening cluster every time, and each gate is anchored to a real, identifiable place, never to a myth with no fixed location. The first block names Eridu, the city Sumerian tradition treats as the oldest in the world, founded before the flood and said to sit at the edge of the freshwater abzu beneath the earth. The gate at Eridu is described as Sheg, calm, guarded by nothing, requiring no ritual to approach. It reads almost like a footnote, the safest entry on the list, included for completeness rather than warning, the kind of line a census taker writes about the household with nothing to report. The second block names Dilmun, the land Sumerian myth places somewhere in the Gulf and associates with immortality, purity, and the dwelling place of the gods after the flood. The gate at Dilmun carries a different determinative, the one used elsewhere for sacred restricted space, and a single qualifying phrase, "New dew, do not enter." No explanation follows. The scribe who would not flag a damaged sign as uncertain offers no elaboration here either. The instruction sits there, unsupported, the way a warning sign sits on a fence without telling you what is on the other side of it. The third block moves away from named cities entirely and locates a gate beneath open water in what the text calls the Great Salt Sea to the south, a description several scholars have matched to the Persian Gulf Basin, where Sumerian trade routes to Dilmun and beyond are independently attested. This gate carries the status marker EG bar, kept under watch, a term used in administrative context for goods or prisoners requiring an assigned guard, not for empty water. Someone, the tablet implies, was still watching this gate when the list was copied, generations after the flood it presumably predates. The fourth gate is tied to a structure the tablet calls a drowned house of the god, a temple the scribe describes as already underwater at the time of writing. Mansour flagged this line twice in her working notes because it implies something the King List does not say directly, that the flood, or something like it, did not recede uniformly across the land. Some places came back. According to this tablet, others did not, and a god's house had simply stayed beneath the surface, unmentioned in any temple hymn Mansour could recall. 4 gates in, the pattern held without exception. Place name, brief description, single status marker, 3 to 5 signs. It was the 5th block where the formula first wavered, just slightly, in a way Mansour almost missed on her initial pass. 2 more blocks after that wavered further still, and the 8th block, when she finally reached it that same afternoon, did not follow the pattern at all. It followed no pattern she recognised from any sign list, Sumerian or Akkadian, and she would spend the next 6 weeks trying to determine whether that was deliberate. The 9th and final block was the shortest entry on the tablet. 4 signs, no place name, no description. Just a status marker, repeated twice for emphasis, the way a scribe writes something he wants a reader centuries later not to miss. Mansour did not yet know what that marker said. She did not yet know why the 8th block, alone among 9 entries, seemed to resist translation entirely. What she knew, by the end of that first week, was that someone had built a numbered, ruled, formally structured record of 9 specific locations beneath water, and that whoever copied it down, generations after the flood that supposedly ended the threat, had still considered it necessary to mark gate by gate which doors stayed shut. The 5th block was the one Mansour kept returning to that first week, because it was the first entry where the formula bent rather than broke. It still opened with K-Ab, still named a feature instead of a city, but the feature was water. The text calls bitter beyond drinking, and the determinative attached to it was the same one used elsewhere on the tablet for disease and contamination, not geography. Its status marker was different too. Not Igibar, watched, but Dabku, a compound meaning roughly seized and consumed, a phrase Mansour had only ever seen applied to grain stores ruined past saving. Whatever the gate at the bitter water led to, the scribe was describing it the way an administrator describes spoiled inventory. Not dangerous exactly, but already lost. What troubled Mansour about that entry was the precision attached to a place with no name. Sumerian administrative texts rarely waste signs on locations they cannot specify, yet this one gave coordinates of a kind, a distance in cubits from a named canal junction near Eridu, and a depth marker, Bru, deep, repeated twice, the same doubling convention used elsewhere on the tablet for emphasis. A scribe willing to measure something that precisely while refusing to name it was not being careless, he was being selective. The 6th block introduced something none of the previous 5 had, a verb of construction. The earlier gates were found, watched, or avoided. This one was built. The tablet says the gate was closed with Naruah, the great stone, set in place by named workers whose number the scribe records precisely. 60 men, a round administrative figure that suggested an actual labour order rather than poetic exaggeration. The closure is described as duabi, fixed, not to be moved, a phrase used elsewhere only for boundary stones marking permanent land grants. Someone had treated this gate not as a place to avoid, but as a problem to be physically solved, and had recorded the manpower it took to solve it. Mansour checked the labour figure against comparable Sumerian construction records from Lagash and Ur, where similar 60 and 70-man crews appear in connection with temple foundations and canal sluices, substantial projects but never anything classified in any surviving administrative text as urgent. Whoever ordered this closure had access to the same kind of organised labour a city used to build a temple, deployed instead to seal a single gate, permanently, with a stone the scribe insists could not be moved again. That last detail was the one that stayed with her. A door built to be reopened gets a latch. This one, by design, did not. The 7th block, the one Mansur had flagged as wavering further still in her notebook, turned out on closer reading to describe not a place at all but a duty. It names a body of priests, sangha, temple administrators, not the lower ritual staff who perform daily offerings, and assigns them a rotating watch over a gate the text never bothers to locate. The watch is described as unbroken, gub-gub, standing, the doubled sign Sumerian scribes used to indicate a condition that continues without interruption across an unspecified length of time. The rotation itself is laid out almost like a duty roster. Shifts measured in a counting unit Mansur could not fully resolve, but consistent enough across the line to suggest a schedule meant to be followed indefinitely, not improvised once and forgotten. Mansur brought in a second translator that week, an Assyriologist named Dr. Petros Anagnou, visiting from a research post in Munich, specifically to check this block against her reading. He confirmed the doubling. Generations after this tablet was copied, whoever maintained the original record, this copy descended from still expected someone, somewhere, to be standing watch. It was the 8th block, finally, where Anagnou stopped being a second opinion and became, in his own words to Mansur, uneasy. The block does not describe a gate. It describes the absence of one. Where every other entry runs 3 to 5 signs in a consistent grammatical sequence, the 8th block consists of a deliberately smooth depression in the clay. Not damage, not the ordinary wear of 5,000 years, but a flattened patch roughly the width of 2 fingers, pressed while the clay was still wet, erasing whatever had been written there before the tablet dried. Scribes erased mistakes constantly. They did not erase mistakes and then leave the depression uncorrected, unfilled, conspicuously blank in the middle of an otherwise complete and carefully ruled list. A correction normally gets written over. This was simply removed. What convinced Mansur the 8th gate mattered most of all. 9 was not the blank space itself, but what surrounded it. The 7th block's standing watch and the 9th block's repeated status marker were both, grammatically, written to refer backward, Sumerian scribal convention for cross-referencing an earlier line in the same document. Anagnou traced both references and found they pointed to the same missing block. The priests were watching something the text refuses to name. The final marker, whatever it said, was describing the same thing the priests were standing over. 2 separate entries on the tablet were both quietly oriented around a gate whose identity had been pressed out of the clay before it ever had the chance to dry. By the end of that second week, the working theory inside the small team Mansur had assembled, herself, Anagnou, and a junior epigraphist documenting their notes, was straightforward and, to all 3 of them, uncomfortably convenient. 8 gates were named, located, and accounted for: open, forbidden, watched, spoiled, sealed, and guarded. The 9th was short, urgent, and unmistakably about something having already happened. The simplest explanation was that someone, at some point after the original text was first set down, had gone back and physically removed the name of the one gate the rest of the tablet was built around, because naming it again, even centuries later, was something nobody wanted a future reader to be able to do. Mansur wrote that theory into her preliminary notes the way she would have written any other working hypothesis. Provisional, unconfirmed, awaiting the 9th block's full translation, the same caution she applied to every unverified reading in 12 years of fieldwork. She did not yet know that the 9th block's 2 signs, both still intact, legible, undamaged, were about to tell her the theory was wrong, that the obvious gate, the missing gate, the gate the scribe had pressed out of existence, was not the one the tablet said had opened at all. The 9th block's 2 signs were not damaged, not ambiguous, and not difficult to read once Anagnou set his transliteration beside Mansur's. The first sign was a verb, do, opened, written plainly, without the hedging particles Sumerian scribes used when reporting something second-hand. The second sign was the backward reference marker the team had already traced twice that week. The same grammatical device pointing from Block 7's standing watch and Block 9's status marker toward whatever the priest had been guarding. Anagnou ran the reference a 3rd time, expecting it to resolve, again, to the smooth depression of Block 8. It did not. The reference pointed to Block 1. Eridu, the gate the scribe had called Sheg, calm, guarded by nothing, requiring no ritual to approach. The gate nobody on the team had spent more than a sentence on, because it had read like the safest line on the tablet. For close to a full minute, according to the notes the junior epigraphist kept that day, nobody said anything. Ananu checked his own transliteration sign by sign, the way a person checks an address twice before believing they have the wrong house. Mansour pulled up her week 1 photographs of Block 1 and laid them beside the 9th block's reference marker under raking light. The grammar held. There was no alternate reading that sent the reference anywhere else. 8 gates had been catalogued by exactly the kind of caution a Bronze Age administration reserved for things it considered dangerous. The 9th had failed at the one location nobody had bothered to flag. Mansour went back to her own notes from the first week and reread her translation of Block 1 with a different question in mind. Not what does this say, but what does this not say? The earlier reading held. Eridu's gate carried no warning, no status marker beyond Sheg, no instruction to watch or avoid. That absence, which had registered to 3 translators as reassurance, now registered as something else. Every other gate had been flagged precisely because someone at some point had reason to flag it. Eridu's gate had no flag because nobody had ever expected it to need one. What the 9th block says happened there is short, and the brevity is what makes it land. Water rose at the gate, a bowl, water came up. Not floodwater arriving from outside, but water ascending from beneath through the gate itself, as though the gate had stopped being a door and become a drain running the wrong direction. The text places the event at night and adds a detail with no parallel anywhere else on the tablet. Izinuzalag, fire that gives no light. Or, read against later, Akkadian cognates, Anagnu cross-checked the same evening, a glow without flame, light that came from the water itself, or from the ground around it, rather than from any source a Sumerian scribe had a word for. The line that follows describes the water's behaviour with the same flat precision the rest of the tablet uses for grain counts and labour crews. It rose to a measured height, held there for a count of time rendered in night watches rather than days, and then withdrew on its own, leaving the ground around the gate, in the scribe's words, changed in its taste, a phrase elsewhere on the tablet reserved for soil ruined by salt. No fire damage is mentioned. No structure is described as broken. The gate itself, the text notes almost as an afterthought, remained standing afterward. Nothing needed to be rebuilt, because nothing about the gate had failed in any way a Bronze Age builder could repair. Reed cutters working the marsh edge near the mound the tablet calls Eridu, and that modern archaeology identifies with the ruined field at Abu Sharain in southern Iraq, are recorded as the ones who carried the warning inland. The text calls them Luigidu, watchers, the same compound used in unrelated flood literature for those positioned to see trouble before a city does. What they reported, condensed by the scribe into 4 signs, was water that should not have been rising, light that should not have been burning, and a sound the tablet does not translate, marked twice with the sign for no word. Anagnu was the one who made the comparison out loud first, hesitantly, the way a scientist raises something he expects to be wrong. Seismologists have documented in modern instrumented earthquakes a real phenomenon called earthquake light. Luminous glows, sometimes blue-white, sometimes diffuse, appearing near active faults in the seconds and minutes around significant ground rupture, most plausibly produced by stress on quartz-bearing rock, generating brief electrical charge that ionizes the air above it. The Gulf Basin sits on a tectonically active margin, laced with fault systems still capable of triggering exactly the kind of sudden seismic event that can also rupture a confined aquifer, sending pressurized groundwater upward through whatever opening happens to exist. A fissure, a spring, a gate built into the side of a mound precisely because that was where the water already wanted to go. Mansour sent the relevant lines, without the rest of the tablet's content attached, to a hydrogeologist she had worked with on an unrelated salinity survey 2 years earlier, Dr. Faisal Khoury at a Gulf Region Research Institute, asking only whether a sudden artesian discharge of saline groundwater, accompanied by transient luminosity, was physically plausible in that basin. Khoury's reply, forwarded back within the week, did not mention Sumerian tablets, gates, or scribes, because he had not been told any of that. He confirmed, in entirely separate language, that confined aquifers under sufficient tectonic stress can discharge abruptly through existing fissures, that such discharges in saline strata can leave soil measurably altered afterward, and that reports of light phenomena coinciding with seismic aquifer rupture, while uncommon, were not unprecedented in the geological literature. He had answered a hypothetical. He had also, without knowing it, confirmed a translation. A scribe standing in a flat agricultural landscape with no vocabulary for plate tectonics or piezoelectric discharge would have had exactly two tools available to describe such an event: water rising from below and a light with no fire in it. He used both in that order, and then he stopped, because the watchers he was recording from had nothing more specific to give him. The gate did not need stone or priests, or a status marker reserved for spoiled grain because nobody had built it to fail. It had simply been sitting, calm, directly above the one place on the tablet's list where the ground itself had never finished moving. Mansur completed the full translation in late spring and circulated it to 3 colleagues outside Iraq, the way any careful epigraphist verifies a reading before committing to it in print. A scholar at a research centre in Philadelphia responded within days, calling the 9-gate structure one of the more unusual administrative texts to surface from the region in a decade, and asked when high-resolution images would be available. A colleague in London asked for the images first, before offering any opinion on the translation itself, standard caution for a text this unusual, and noted that the backward reference convention linking the 7th, 8th and 9th blocks deserved its own short paper. The third reader, at a university in Germany, did not respond for nearly 2 months, and when he did, his message was short. Publication should wait until the tablet itself could be independently examined, ideally by more than one outside team. He did not say why he believed that examination mattered more for this tablet than for the dozens of comparable administrative texts that get published every year without it, and Mansur did not ask him to clarify. Anu, for his part, kept his name off the preliminary paper entirely, citing his visiting status rather than any disagreement with the reading. He did continue corresponding with Curie for several more weeks after the hydrogeologist's initial reply, asking follow-up questions about how confidently a saline aquifer discharge could be dated from soil composition alone, given enough time and the right samples. Curie's answers grew shorter as the questions grew more specific, until he asked, not unreasonably, what exactly the samples in question were dated to, and Anu did not answer that question either. Mansur submitted a preliminary paper to a regional journal of Near Eastern epigraphy that summer, limited deliberately to the tablet's physical description, the colophon, and the 8 straightforward gate entries, with only a single cautious paragraph noting the 9th block's content without elaborating on it. It came back within a month, declined on procedural grounds. The journal did not accept analysis of unpublished material lacking full institutional sign-off, a standard and unremarkable policy applied to dozens of submissions every year. What followed was less standard. In the early autumn, the State Board of Antiquities reclassified the tablet under a restricted access category, normally reserved for objects of significant national heritage value, a designation the tablet, by any reasonable account, had not yet had time to earn. The review board overseeing that category meets only twice a year, and further access would require a formal application reviewed at the board's next session. A storage crate find from a flooded basement, 12 months earlier of interest mainly to cuneiform specialists, was now filed alongside material the state considered too sensitive for routine study. Mansur was asked, in writing, to remove her working photographs from personal devices pending the review board's first session, a request with no clear precedent she or her colleagues could recall. Whether she complied is not part of any record outside the board. The tablet remains in the museum's collection, uncatalogued for public reference, its working translation held privately among the small number of people who produced it. None of them have published anything beyond the preliminary paper that was returned without review. None have spoken about the 9th gate on record, in any forum, in the time since. What the translation leaves unanswered outnumbers what it resolves. If the 8th gate was deliberately erased from the clay before it ever dried, the question is what made that specific entry worth removing, if not the gate that ultimately failed. If the 7th gate's priests were assigned an unbroken rotating watch the scribe describes as still continuing centuries after the flood, the question is what they were watching for, and whether anyone, anywhere, considers that watch still active. If 8 gates were named, measured, sealed, or guarded with the particular caution Bronze Age administrators reserved for things they took seriously. The question is how many other locations, on how many other lists nobody has yet found, were left unflagged for the same reason Eridu's gate was left unflagged, because nobody thought a calm entry needed watching at all. There is a narrower question buried inside the larger ones, the one Mansour raised with an Agnew near the end of their correspondence and never resolved. Whether the scribe who copied this tablet, generations after the flood, knew which of the 9 gates had already failed when he sat down to write, or whether he was copying a list whose 9th line was, for him too, simply inherited information rather than first-hand testimony. If he knew, the calm description of Eridu's gate was not an oversight but a closed file, a place already proven safe enough not to need a warning, right up until it stopped being safe. If he did not know, then the list itself predates the failure it records, and someone updated it afterward, quietly, with 2 signs and a backward reference, without ever revising the original entry to reflect what had happened there. Comparable 9 and 12 block ritual lists exist in other Sumerian and later Babylonian collections, most of them catalogued decades ago, transliterated once, and shelved without anyone checking whether their calmest, least flagged entries carry the same kind of backward reference this tablet's 9th block carries. Nobody has gone looking, because nobody had reason to look for a pattern this specific until this tablet surfaced. Mansour has not gone looking either, not yet, though she has said, off the record, that she would like to. The tablet does not answer these questions, any more than it editorialised on the original 9. It named the gates, marked their status, recorded the labour spent sealing one, and the rotation assigned to guard another, and noted in 2 plain signs which one had already failed. It did not explain why. It did not warn anyone in advance. It simply kept the count, the way a scribe trained on grain shipments keeps a count, applied this time to 9 sealed places beneath the water instead of 9 granaries, because counting was the only tool he had for something his language had no better word for. 9 gates were listed. 8 were flagged, watched, sealed, or struck from the record entirely. One carried no warning at all, because nothing about it had ever seemed to need one. It is the one the tablet says opened. The tablet does not say whether the others are still standing the way they were left, sealed, watched, waiting, or only the one that mattered least to watch,